so it will be an essential global partner when it comes to tackling global climate change. And the Chinese people study and work all over the world, making an extraordinary contribution. So, Mr. Speaker, let me be really clear about this. We want to work with China. There's enormous scope for positive, constructive engagement. There are wide-ranging opportunities from increasing trade to cooperation in tackling climate change, as I've said, in particular with a view to the COP26 summit next year, which the UK will, of course, be hosting. But as we strive for that positive relationship, we're also clear-sighted about the challenges that lie ahead. We will always protect our vital interests, including sensitive infrastructure, and we won't accept any investment that compromises our domestic or national security. Mr. Speaker, we'll be clear where we disagree, and I have been clear about our grave concerns regarding the gross human rights abuses being perpetrated against the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. And, Mr. Speaker, it's precisely because we see China's role in the world as a fellow member of the G20, a fellow permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, that we expect China to live up to the international obligations and the international responsibilities that come with that stature. That's the positive, constructive, the mature, the reciprocal relationship with China. Striving for good cooperation, honest and clear where we have to disagree. And, Mr. Speaker, we have been clear regarding the new national security has imposed on the people of Hong Kong. It's a serious violation of the UK-China Joint Declaration and with it a violation of China's assumed international obligations. On the 1st of July now, a bespoke immigration route for British nationals overseas and their dependents. Citizenship in the UK. The Secretary will set out further details on the plans for a new bespoke and their dependents before recess. This bespoke route will be ready by Q1. In the meantime, the Home Secretary has force officers the ability to grant leave to BNOs and dependents at the UK border. Speaker, beyond our offer to BNOs, today we are taking two further measures, which are a necessary and proportionate response to this new national security legislation, which we've now had the opportunity to assess very carefully. First, given the role China has now assumed for the internal security of Hong Kong and the authority it's exerting over law enforcement, the arms embargo that we've applied to mainland China since 1989. To be clear, the extension of this embargo will mean there will be no exports from the UK to Hong Kong of potentially lethal weapons, their components or ammunition. And it will also mean a ban on the export of any equipment not already banned which might be used for internal repression, such as shackles, intercept equipment, firearms and smoke grenades. Mr. Speaker, the second measure relates to the position of this new national security legislation has significantly changed key assumptions underpinning our extradition treaty arrangements with Hong Kong. And I have to say, I'm particularly concerned about Articles 55 to 59 of the law, which give mainland Chinese authorities the ability to assume jurisdiction over certain cases and to try those cases in mainland Chinese courts. Mr. Speaker, the national security law does not provide legal or judicial safeguards in such cases, and I'm also concerned about the breach of the extraterritorial provisions. So I have consulted with the Home Secretary, the Justice Secretary and the Attorney General and the government to suspend the extradition treaty immediately and indefinitely. And I should also tell the House that we would not consider reactivating those arrangements unless and until there are clear and robust safeguards which are able to prevent extradition from the UK being misused under the new national security legislation. Mr. Speaker, there remains considerable uncertainty about the way in which the new national security law will be enforced. I would just say this: the United Kingdom is watching and the whole world is watching. And in the last few weeks, I've been engaged with many of our international partners in a concerted dialogue about how we should best respond to the unfolding events that we're seeing in Hong Kong. On the 8th of July, I spoke with our Five Eyes Foreign Minister partners. We agreed on the seriousness of China's actions and the importance of pressing Beijing to meet its international obligations. I welcome the fact Australia, Canada and the US have taken a range of measures with respect to Hong Kong, including variously export controls and extradition, as we are taking. I also discussed the situation with our European partners including Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, and the UK Government also welcomes the EU announcement on the 13th of July, which sets out further proposed measures in response to the national security legislation. A number of our international partners are also considering what offers they may be willing to make to the people of Hong Kong following the UK offer in relation to BNOs. And so I can reassure the House we will continue to take a leading role in engaging and in coordinating our actions with our international partners, our historic commitment to the people of Hong Kong. Mr. Speaker, as I said at the outset, we want a positive relationship with China. There's a huge amount to be gained for both countries. There are areas where we can work productively, constructively, to mutual benefit together. For our part, the UK will work hard and in good faith towards that goal. But we will protect our vital interests. We will stand up for our values and we will hold national obligations. The specific measures I've announced today are a proportionate response to China's failure of international obligations with respect to Hong Kong, and I commend this statement to the House.
Now come to Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank sight of it? And can I be clear that we strongly welcome both of the measures that he has announced today? He saw that Britain doesn't allow our exports to be used against the people of Hong Kong. And can I thank him warmly for taking this step forwards? I am particularly glad that the Government has listened to the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade and suspended the export of surveillance equipment to go alongside the suspension of the export of crowd control equipment, which was demanded of the Government by the Labour opposition last year. Will he go further and also review the training of by the Royal College of Policing and other UK police forces to ensure that we are playing a part in helping to uphold and not suppress the rights of the people of Hong Kong? Can I also welcome the indefinite suspension of the extradition treaty and the safeguards that he announced today? It affords protection to the Hong Kong diaspora community here in the UK, and particularly to the brave young pro-democracy activists who I recently... We believe it is vital that the world shows a coordinated front on this. And I was heartened to hear that he'd had discussions with our Five Eyes partners. Canada, Australia and the USA have already taken this step. Will he speak to other key allies, including Germany, to ensure there is a coordinated international response? He also made no mention of our Commonwealth. Has he reached out to those Commonwealth countries who have extradition treaties with Hong Kong to ensure that BNO passport holders and pro-democracy activists can travel freely without fear of arrest and extradition? Mr. Speaker, there are a number of other steps that the Foreign Secretary could take. He made a commitment today that the UK will not accept investment in our national security. Can he confirm then that this will extend to the proposed nuclear power project at Bradwell? And can he tell us what assessment the Government has made of the security implications of Sizewell C? Elections are due to take place in Hong Kong in the autumn, and we are concerned that, just as in the case of Joshua Wong, the Chinese government may seek to bar candidates from standing. A clear statement from the Foreign Secretary today that candidates selected through the primary process are legitimate and must be allowed to stand in those elections would send a message that, as he says, the world is watching. Can I also independent election observers are allowed into Hong Kong in order to oversee those elections? Mr. Speaker, by my suggestion yesterday that the UK ought to impose Magnitsky sanctions on Chinese officials involved in persecuting the Uyghur people and basic freedoms in Hong Kong. But may I gently say to him that we have known that the Uyghur have been detained in camps since at least 2017. Can I ask him if any work at all has been done on this by the Foreign Office? That the USA has already imposed similar sanctions. Is he working with our US counterparts to UK sanctions, and will he discuss this with the US Secretary of State tomorrow when he meets him? Mr. Speaker, he may not have done the groundwork that would enable him to impose Magnitsky sanctions now, but his government does have the power right now to take action. He could, for example, as the US has done, ECP officials from the UK. Why hasn't he done it? The Chinese ambassador that he reserved the right to take action against British companies. What discussions has he had with British companies operating in China to offer advice and assistance? I've asked him a number of times whether he's had discussions with HSBC and Standard Chartered about their stated support for the national security law. He must condemn that support. We should be showing the best of British business, not the worst of British business to the world. I was pleased to hear he's had discussions with Australia and New Zealand about them making a similar offer to BNO passport holders, but we are concerned, after asking a range of parliamentary questions, that there are in this offer. We have been told by the government that the BNO passport holders will not, and their families will not receive home status for tuition fees, that they will not have access to most benefits, that they will have to pay surcharge. This seems to me to be wrong. We are passport holders to the UK for similar reasons to refugees. But these measures are without serious action before these proposals are published. We will essentially be offering safe, but only to the rich and highly skilled. Now, that may benefit the UK, but it lacks the generosity and moral demands. He will also know that many young pro-democracy activists are too young to be eligible for BNO passports. The Home Secretary said last week that she was considering a specific scheme for 18 to 23-year-olds. Will those details be published before summer, and can he provide more detail today? Mr. Speaker, finally, this must mark the start of a more strategic approach to China, based on an ethical approach to foreign policy and an end to the naivety of the golden era years. And if it does, he can be assured that he will have our full support on this side of the House. Like him, our quarrel is not with the people of China, but the erosion of freedoms in Hong Kong, the actions of the Chinese government in the South China Sea, and the appalling treatment of the Uyghur people Act. We will not be able to say in future years that we did not know, and I urge colleagues across government to ensure that this marks the start of a strategic approach to China and the start of a new era. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her response, and in particular her support for the two measures we're taking today, suspending the extradition treaty arrangements and extending the arms embargo. I might note that there's a drastically different tone being taken from the front bench from even a few weeks ago, her support, and will do so in a spirit of cross-party endeavour and the importance of sending a very clear signal to Beijing and indeed to our international partners of where we stand. She asked about the recourse. She's right about that. It's a question of balance. We'll keep that under constant review. She mentioned a range of points about B&O, the details on it. They will be set forward by the Home Secretary shortly in the way I described. I would urge her to wait for the detail before critiquing it. Home Secretary and the Home Office have been doing a huge amount of work since September last year on all of this, and we also need to bear in mind the other offers that other countries quite rightly and usefully will be making. On international coordination, I welcome what she said about the importance of working with my German opposite number. I'm seeing him this week. It's something which is squarely on the agenda. We've also already, obviously through the Five Eyes membership, touched base with a number of our Commonwealth colleagues, but I'll continue to do that. I think she's right about this point. It needs to be more than just the Europeans and the UK with the North Americans, the traditional Five Eyes and Europeans, because there's a whole range of non-aligned countries out there who are very much influenced by what China is doing and saying, and we want them to support us in upholding the international rule of law, which in all areas, including, as she mentioned, the South China Sea, will be very important. On investments, we rigorously review investments into this country from the security point of view, but also whether our powers are sufficient, so that we will keep under review, and I know the Secretary of State for Business is looking at it very carefully. I think she's right as well about the September LegCo elections. I've made clear that we want to see them allowed to take place in the way that is recognised not just in the joint declaration but also the basic law, and I agree with her on the point about disqualification of candidates. I think we also need to be just realistic, if I'm honest with her, about the likelihood of China or the Hong Kong authorities accepting international observers. She asked about Magnitsky sanctions. It's not the case. She's simply wrong to say that we haven't done our homework on this. We've done our homework since August of last year, which is why those sanctions for the situation with Jamal Khashoggi, Sergei Magnitsky and North Korea. And of course the national security legislation, which we're responding to, has only just been enacted, let alone starting to be enforced. So we will patiently gather the evidence. It takes months. It is not just something that can be done on a political whim. Indeed, it would be improper. It would be improper if that was the case. And of course, if you introduce those targeted sanctions in this field, indeed any other, without having done your factual evidential due diligence, not only are they likely to be challenged, but you're at risk of propaganda coup to the very people that we are seeking to target. She mentioned HSBC. She may or may not have already heard the comments I've made about that. I think certainly on our side we will not allow the rights, the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong to be sacrificed on the altar of bankers' bonuses, and we all businesses to look very carefully about how they respond. They're of course going to be nervous about any retaliatory measures that may be taken by Beijing. In any event, we're very clear on the path that we're taking, and as I said before, we want a good relationship with China. I think it's very important that we have a balanced, open debate about this in the House, recognise the opportunities of a good relation with China, but be clear-eyed, as this government is, about the risks and what we do to protect against them.
Chair of the Select Committee, John Toogan.
Mr. Speaker, and may I thank again, I'm getting to a bad habit here, may I thank again my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, for an extremely good policy change. This makes the fifth, by my count, that he's backed the Foreign Affairs Committee on, which is the strategic alignment of the departments, BNOs overseas, Magnitsky's protocols generally, and foreign ownership control overseas. Now, this is actually for his work, because he was so instrumental in many of these things from his time on the backbenches. But given that his time before even entering here as a human rights lawyer, could I just ask why he hasn't yet made an announcement of the Uyghur Muslim population in Western China, action that his opposite number in the United States, or rather the US Treasury, has already taken, and which has been campaigned on so forcefully by my honourable friend, the member for Rutland and Melton, and of course my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green. Could I also ask what his view is of Article 38, territoriality of this jurisdiction, of this this security law, and the implications for British and Canadian and Australian and New Zealand judges sitting on the Court of Final Appeal, and whether he's discussed that with his opposite numbers, because of course the application of that law, Chinese law, into a common law jurisdiction could make the position of those judges untenable, and it is really for him to advise them on how to act.
Can I thank my honourable friend, the Chairman of the Select Committee, for his fulsome support and his Select Committee's fulsome support for the action the government has taken. Plenty of credit to go around, but the reality is we've taken, I think, a proportionate approach, one which recognises the severity of what's happening in Hong Kong, but also, in the way I described, seeks to have a balanced and telegraph a balanced message to the government in Beijing that is there with goodwill and with respect for international obligations to be a positive one. He asked, we have made very clear our position. Indeed, we led for the first time in the United Nations Human Rights Council a statement on the situation on human rights in both Hong Kong and Xinjiang. 27 countries in total signed that statement. It's the first time it's been done. He asked also in relation to judges on the Supreme Court, we obviously keep under careful review, given the need and indeed the commitment in the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law for the autonomy of the judiciary, as well as the autonomy of the legislators to be respected. And so we will discuss that with our international partners. He asked, I think, finally about extraterritoriality. It's not entirely clear, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, will work in practice, whether it would just apply to Hong Kong residents when they're outside of the country, or whether indeed it is intended to apply to non-Chinese, non-Hong Kong. And that is one of the factors, amongst others, that informed our approach to the suspension of extradition.
We now come to SNP spokesman Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement, and I commend him on the tone and the content of it. He picks up tone from the opposition benches. There has been something of a change in the government's position as well of late, so I think we should all recognise this is evolving fast. I would associate us with support in both the measures in the statement. I think it is proportionate and fair. We also want a positive relationship with China. They are a key partner in renewable energy, as he rightly says, but they are making it increasingly difficult with the actions, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, with One Belt, One Road, over Hong Kong Sea, the situation in Taiwan, of course, and Xinjiang. Also, commercial piracy and industrial espionage. There is lots of cause for concern about the actions of the Chinese state. So we do support these measures, but I press them on 3 further points. Firstly, on the Magnitsky sanctions, I accept fully that this has to be done properly, but it could be done properly faster. And I think there is a need to accelerate, particularly in the case of the Uyghur situation, proportionate sanctions there. And on the suspension of the extradition treaty, this is not something to be celebrated. The breakdown of cooperation will make the fight against organised crime in and London harder. So what comes next? Will it be a case-by-case basis to evolve some sort of new arrangement to deal with that pressing problem? Because it is and will remain a pressing problem. And on students, which is where I think this debate will get to quite quickly, Stirling University, my constituency, and universities up and down the UK and Scotland, welcome thousands of Chinese students, and we value academic freedom, and we're glad to see them here. Precisely that academic freedom that the state of China is looking to take advantage of. Is there guidance which could be provided to implications of having so many Chinese students in their institution, both from a security and financial perspective? And is there any analysis underway of the Confucius Institutes, which I believe do need a bit more attention than they've had to date?
Can I thank the Honourable Gentleman and welcome his support on the 2 measures that we've announced today. He asked about Magnitsky made to the Honourable Lady, and I welcome the fulsome and eager support for the regime on this side of the House introduced, but with cross-party support, which we welcome. I just call for just a note of caution in terms of speed. It's very important that these targets are right, not quick. If you do them too quickly, they'll be legally challenged. Not only will then they be ineffective, but you risk, as I said to the Honourable Lady, giving a propaganda coup to the very individuals whom we are seeking to hold to account. On extradition, the approach that we've taken, and I set it out quite deliberately, was that we are suspending, not just wholesale terminating, we're suspending the extradition treaty arrangements so that it is clear that they could be resuscitated in the future. But as I also made very clear, we would need to have clear, adequate and robust safeguards to protect against the potential abuses that we see in the nationals before that could even be contemplated. So I think that is the approach that we would consider. He also, I think, referred to my comment about a different tone on the opposition benches. I hope he doesn't mind me noting that it wasn't that long ago that the Scottish Government, as China engagement strategy, called for Scotland to be seen as the preferred trade and investment partner in China. I sense that maybe there's a slight nuance in position in 2020.
In Duncan Smith.
I unreservedly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today. He's taken the right decision. We've had good cause to suspend the extradition treaty, and I will now withdraw my amendments to the extradition bill. Not that that's been keeping him asleep at night, I expect. But I just want to also associate myself with the chairman of the Select Committee on the issue of the follow-on things that we may do. And it is true that he's right that he has to be very careful on the legal elements of what he does with regards to sanctions on individuals now that we've created the Magnitsky changes. But the issue really is that the Uyghurs and the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance published the report on the forced sterilisation of the Uyghur women a few weeks ago, and there are lots of evidence now of those involved in it. Could I encourage him, in line with many of my honourable friends and those on the other side of the House, to do what he can to accelerate officials to look at this urgently, look at the Uyghur elements that we may force sanctions on those responsible, and on Hong Kong, on people like Carrie Lam and her predecessor, Mr. Leung, as well now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank him for his support for the measures today, and also thank him for withdrawing his amendment. I appreciate his magnanimity in that regard. And on Magnitsky, of course, he's raising 2 different issues, which is one, their application potentially in relation to Hong Kong, secondly in relation to Xinjiang. We, of course, have a process for gathering all of the evidence on all of those potential cases. Obviously, in relation to the national security legislation, newly enacted, so that will take some time. But he's right, and I've been reading over the weekend the reports by Amnesty International in 2019 and 2020 on the range of abuses in Xinjiang, the reports by Human Rights Watch between 2018 and 2020 on the mass detention and political indoctrination, and also looking at the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination and their report in 2018, around massive internment camps with no rights. So we are looking at this very carefully, but as he rightly notes, it is important to assess this very carefully, and also it's not just a question of whether the abuses took place, it's whether individual responsibility can be ascribed to someone whom we wish to impose a visa ban or an asset freeze on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems somehow wrong to be welcoming a suspension of extradition and exports, but backward steps though these may be, they are necessary, and my party will support them. Never mind, though, the restrictions on exports. When will the government start looking at those materials that we are importing from China? In particular, the materials manufactured by Hikvision, some of the most intrusive surveillance technology to be found anywhere in the world, and which was used widely in Xinjiang province, and which is now being purchased and installed by public and private authorities up and down this country. Will the government look at that in a joined-up way? And on the subject of Xinjiang province, the world is watching, and absolutely horrific. There was the drone footage at the weekend. Last week there was the interception of a shipment of human hair. I know that genocide is in law and that the Foreign Secretary is right to be cautious about its use, but it would make an enormous difference to tackling the issues as far as Xinjiang province are concerned. Admit from the dispatch box of adminicals of evidence to say that that is absolutely what is happening.
Honourable gentleman for his typically focused and considered remarks, and also thank him for his support. In relation to UK regulation and the regime that applies to imports, we have a strong and rigorous scheme in place. Bayes will, of course, look at any individual cases that he wishes to raise, and we are joined up, which was a question that he asked, via the National Security Council and the other structures in a more close and integrated way, and actually COVID-19 has encouraged that more. In relation to the definition of genocide, of course, the real challenge with it, and I've worked on war crimes since well before becoming a member of this House, Mr. Speaker, is the question of intention and deliberate and ascribed to it. The reality is, as important as that is, and it does bring in with it legal implications which do help the accountability, the reality is it can also, we are increasingly confident, and there is a strong case to answer, as I think the Chinese ambassador was unable to do yesterday on the Andrew Marr show, of systematic human rights abuses. And frankly, what the legal label on it is, to me, secondary to the plight suffering under it.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement as we develop a new relationship with China. The Foreign Secretary mentioned Uyghurs just once in his statement, but his House is concerned about the human rights abuses taking place in Xinjiang. If there is enough evidence for the Americans to put sanctions on officials in Xinjiang, can the Foreign Secretary have sight of this evidence to see if we can do the same here? The Foreign Secretary, of course, repeatedly states that the term genocide is a legal term and we need international courts to apply this. But when it comes to the UN and China, the UN is a busted flush. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary whether convening an independent inquiry for us to collect evidence to see if genocide is taking place in Xinjiang?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady, the points that she's made. Of course, one of the points around the Magnitsky regime that we've introduced is that we have already put in place coordination mechanisms so that we can more regularly and generically coordinate with our Five Eyes partners and share information. And actually there was quite a significant overlap, but not exclusively. This is the UK regime in relation. So we are putting in place that coordination. And I think it's a reasonable point. On genocide, I've repeat the points I've made before, but I have also been clear that this is a gross violation of human rights. And China does need to be answerable and accountable for it. She talked about setting up an inquiry to examine the evidence and to glean it. I think we've got to just be realistic about what China would allow into Xinjiang, and in the absence of that access, I think it's very difficult to see how we could do that. But of course, it's available to all of the select committees in this House, as well as the government in the efforts it does to assess the evidence, to look at that independently of government and indeed the United Nations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyone who saw the footage yesterday on the Andrew Marr show would have found it chilling. In light of that, when the Foreign Secretary meets with the Secretary of State Pompeo tomorrow, will he raise the implement on Chinese officials implicated in the persecution of the Uyghur people in Xinjiang? And does the Foreign Secretary agree that imposing sanctions on those individuals involved should be an absolute priority?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? So I've already raised with Mike Pompeo, as well as my other Five Eyes partners, not just the Magnitsky sanctions regime we put in place, but the designations. And we have given due consideration to cooperation on future evidences. I think it is important. This is an evidence, of course there's political accountability for it. And so what we will do is carefully gather and assess the evidence, and of course we've set out, in answer to his question about priorities, through a policy note which is published I think in the Library of the House, the criteria that we'll approach, the policy approach, and that stresses the nature of the violations, the severity of them, and also our ability to hold the individuals to account at the right level, sufficiently seen to send the right message.
Speaker, I agree with so much of what the Secretary of State is saying, the need for balance, the criticality of China, respect for what it has achieved. But the signal truth is that the China hoped for is not now the China that we are getting. And not only in Hong Kong, but in foreign lobbying, foreign investment, espionage, industrial or otherwise, human rights, our alliances, defence posture, a much more significant reset in our relationship is needed. So can the Secretary of State just confirm, are we approaching all these issues piecemeal, or is there a wider reset? If there is a wider reset, can he explain how government is interacting with parliamentarians and outside experts, and can he reset is going to be presented to Parliament so we can all get to debate it and contribute towards it? Thank you.
Honourable friend, and he's an assiduous follower of China. I know he takes from it. In terms of what the right balance, all the areas of challenge, of course, we could talk about universities, freedom of expression. There are many, but there are also, and I think for balance it's important to say, areas of cooperation. China is one of the biggest investors, I think the biggest investor in renewable technology. If we're going to significantly shift the dial on climate change, China is going to have to be constructive and indeed I think a positive partner which we engage with. He asked about more strategically, how do the measures we take fit a broader strategy, considering that all the time through not just the FCO channels but the National Security Review. He and other members will get precisely the opportunity to scrutinise the more strategic big picture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's announcement in relation to BNOs today, but will he outline the steps his government is taking to guarantee young pro-democracy activists who do not hold a BNO passport holder status will be afforded the same visa rights extensions and protections as BNO passport holders?
The Honourable Lady, as I said, we've made a very clear bespoke offer to BNO holders. The further details will be set out by the Home Secretary. She's already made some comments about the potential gap in years, but I will allow her to set out the full detail and then the House can scrutinise it properly.
Mitchell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome both the tone and the content of what my right honourable friend has said today, and he is surely right to emphasise the importance wherever we can and not confrontation wherever possible. After all, we have more in common with China when it comes to climate change negotiations than we do currently with states. And will he emphasise to the Chinese authorities that the Magnitsky legislation and the human rights measures, which my right honourable friend has so ably and rightly introduced, are not aimed at the Chinese per se, but at human rights abusers, officials and business people, wheresoever they may be?
And is absolutely right. I welcome and thank him for his support. In relation to originally when this was debated, the Russian government said that this was solely aimed at Russia, and when it was originally debated and discussed and enacted in the US, there were different bills in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. We were very clear model that we adopted, that this would be a universal mechanism, that it allows us to target the individuals, whether they're state or non-state actors, and does not involve us as a wider economic embargo or sanctions would do in punishing the individual people of the country. A very bespoke forensic tool, but I believe it gives effect to described.
Let's head to Scotland and visit Peter Grant. Peter Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It teaches us that we cannot stay silent in the face of what's big our community. That warning would be start from anyone, but it comes from the Holocaust Education Trust, and that means that the warning should send a chill through all of us. Can the Secretary of State give an assurance that he will miss no opportunity to remind the Chinese government that abuses of human rights are not an internal matter for China any more than they're an internal matter for anyone, and that further there now is of large-scale breaches in China, then the rest of the world has not only a right but an absolute duty to step in to protect the citizens of China as we protect oppressed citizens of any other country on earth.
Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and of course it is precisely as I said, because we respect China. It is a leading member of the international community, a permanent member of the Security Council, with not just the rights but the obligations that go with it. The commitment to international human rights law, reflective under the UN international law, is incredibly important. With the Chinese government, I've raised it with my Chinese opposite number in Beijing, and we've also, as I made clear, for the first time raised the issue in relation to Xinjiang and Hong Kong Human Rights Council in Geneva.
Jerome Mayu. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Communist Party of China decided to breach the Sino-British Joint Declaration, they knew that they put at risk extradition treaties from countries that value the rule of law. Does my right honourable friend agree that whilst we continue to welcome China's development as a leading economic power, the rules-based international system protects us all and must be defended?
I thank my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. And the UK has got a very strong reputation as being a promoter and guardian of the international rule of law, and I think it's a good guide to our relationship with China, which is why not only has the UK grounded our response to China in relation to Hong Kong in the obligations freely assumed by the Chinese government reflected in the joint declaration, but other countries are doing the same.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the measures that the Foreign Secretary has introduced to the Commons today, I'm sure, are supported by all sides of the House, but its preamble was a little optimistic. I mean, it's quite clear that China organisations has the objective of subverting those organisations rather than either trying to change the rules or obeying the rules. Can he be more explicit about how he intends to work with China when they have that attitude of undermining the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization and other international organisations?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? I make no apology for being stubbornly optimistic about global Britain, including with China, but of course it requires them to live up to their international obligations. I think, though, he makes a very important point about not allowing a vacuum to appear in multilateral institutions. We're talking about that with our US partners, our European partners, across the board. And he gave a few examples. The most obvious recent example where there was concern is in relation to where there was indeed a Chinese candidate for to lead the World Intellectual Property Organization. And actually, there was a groundswell of diplomatic activity to support the Singaporean candidate for precisely those purposes. I think that not only is it the rule of international law that we need to be upholding, but we need to be working with to support the multilateral institutions.
David Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I strongly support these measures today. Can my right honourable friend confirm that when the endeavour comes from China, both public and private, we will stand behind these measures for as long as the national security law remains in its current form?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my we take these measures. We recognise that China will respond, and that is why I was very clear about us taking well-reasoned, focused and proportionate measures in response to China's actions in Hong Kong. To be clear, we will not, certainly in relation to Hong Kong, but also more generally, we will not buck and we'll look for the positive, but we'll prepare for the resilience of our economy, our security, and indeed the resilience of our values.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome strong action over Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, and to secure our critical nature. I'm concerned that reports over the weekend that the government told Huawei that their exclusion from our 5G network was at the behest of the United States. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that when we take such action to defend our national security, we should say so clearly, and that it can never be in our interest to be seen as hiding behind President Trump, particularly as we leave the European Union and seek new partnerships?
Can I thank the honourable lady, thank her for her support for the measures we've taken today. clear from the original decision on Huawei that we wanted to reduce the reliance on high-risk vendors, and it's equally clear, and we just need to be honest about it, that we've had to take the measures that we took, technical necessity following US sanctions to the supply chain. So we'll just be very clear and very honest about that. But there's a much broader challenge for us and our international partners, which is the supply chains and the telecom providers, that we can build up a greater diversification of high-trust vendors in this field, and that's what we're focused on.
Chris Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we're for human rights, we must be for human rights everywhere. If we're for the rule of law, we need to be for the rule of law everywhere. So, in welcoming today's decisive actions in relation to Hong Kong, can I ask friend for assurance that our commitment to pro-democracy campaign minorities across China doesn't end here?
He's absolutely right. I thank him for his intervention on this. And of course, freedom of religion and freedom of expression is not just under threat in Hong Kong or indeed in Xinjiang. It's a broader issue, and we continue to raise it with China and indeed with international partners in the relevant multilateral fora.
Said to Gordon with Afzal Khan. Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Foreign Secretary has noted that almost every member touched on the persecution of Uyghurs. To me, this is pointing towards a demographic genocide. There is well over 1 million Uyghurs detained in camps who are subjected to some of the more of torture. The Chinese government is now taking draconian measures in the aim to curb its Muslim population. So will the Secretary of State agree to meet with the civil society groups who have evidence of human rights abuses in China against the Uyghurs ahead of the next round of designations under the Magnitsky sanctions? And will he raise state of Campo tomorrow?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? And look, he's right to join others in expressing concerns. I made it clear that we regard what's happening in Xinjiang a gross violation of human rights. I've already referred to the reports from Amnesty and Human Rights, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, by 11 UN Special Rapporteurs in November 2019, which raised the issue not just of arbitrary detention but enforced disappearance and torture. We will look very carefully at all of that evidence.
Hello, Brian.
I strongly welcome this statement. Mr. Speaker, whether it's the pictures of Uyghur Muslim children who've been separated from their parents, or the horrifying footage of Uyghurs in chains being herded off of trains and into the camps, or the news that the Chinese government is selling the hair of Uyghurs on the internet, many of these things, and I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will feel this very deeply, are reminiscent of the darkest moments of 20th century history. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that as we work across Whitehall to think about all our different points of leverage on the government in Beijing, we must recognise first that they're on a path of increasing aggression externally and internally, and secondly, we have to think that some of the things that we do to have the most leverage over them may be also the things in our economic interests, whether that be restricting takeovers of companies in this country or restricting their ability to extract technology from our universities. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the only way to stand up to a regime that's becoming more and more bullying is to confront them now?
I thank my honourable friend. He makes a range of good points, and we will, of course, continue to look at all of them in the round. I share his concern about the harrowing echoes of what we're hearing in some of those reports in the past. We, of course, he's right to say we need to use every potential lever that we've got to try and positively moderate or change the behaviour of China. I also think we need to be realistic about the size and the scale of China, and whatever the debate in this House, the likely appetite and disposition, not just of Europeans and non-aligned countries in the United Nations altogether.
Jim Shum.
Mr. Speaker, China stands condemned in the World Court of Rights in relation to their abuse against Christians, against Uyghur Muslims. And this week is the 21st anniversary of the persecution of the Falun Gong, whose followers have been subject to commercial organs of the state of China, backed up with strong World Health Organization evidential base. So will the Secretary of State outline if he will consider sanctions to impose travel bans and its asset freezes against those involved in serious human rights violations against the Falun Gong?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? Of course, as the challenge will be evidentially not just in terms of establishing the abuses, but the individuals responsible. But we are deeply concerned about the persecution of Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Falun Gong practitioners on the grounds of religion or belief in China, including, I think, with the new national security legislation, the risk that that grip only gets tighter.
Or as long as gross abuses go largely uncensored by the UN Human Rights Council, will my right honourable friend ensure that the UK will continue to oppose resolutions made under Item 7 at the United Nations Human Rights Councils, which seems to be grossly disproportionate given out Israel for special attention against its undeniably poor record, whilst China continues systemic, appalling institutional abuse against the Uyghur people, and nobody at the UN Human Rights Council has anything to say about it.
Can I thank my honourable friend, and of course, as I remember well his time as a minister, what a champion of human rights he was. The approach we'll take is to hold the countries to account and the governments to account for the worst human rights abuses, and so far as we possibly can, and he will remember from his time dealing with the United Nations, mitigate and avoid the politicisation of those by governments and others who wish to subvert.
We're now heading to Scotland to Margaret Farrier. Margaret Farrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision to suspend extradition arrangements is a necessary step in protecting human rights, given the series that has taken place as a result of the imposition of the new national security law in Hong Kong. Can the Foreign Secretary update the House on the FCO's recent engagement with society organisations in Hong Kong he will take under the Global Human Rights Sanctions Regulations 2020 to designate sanctions against officials responsible for human rights violations in both Hong Kong?
Honourable Lady, I think I've already answered the question about Magnitsky sanctions. We'll assess the evidence. I don't want to prejudge any future designations, but we'll look at that very carefully. We also engaged and touch with various civil society movements in relation to both Hong Kong and more broadly, and I can say that my honourable friend, the Minister for Asia, Ethan Law, later today, that's one illustration of the engagement we've had.
Government. Thank you. By taking this welcome step to extradition to Hong Kong, we're saying very, very clearly that we have very little confidence in the judicial processes of China. Could my right honourable friend assure me that he will be looking at other extradition treaties that this country has to make sure that there are no routes that China might exploit to get citizens with whom it disagrees back to Hong Kong or China on charges?
Can I thank Honourable certainly all the recent extradition treaty arrangements that we have already have an inbuilt safeguard to mitigate against that potential risk. I hope that can give him the reassurance he needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the announcement made today. I was alarmed, like many others, to hear the Chinese ambassador to the UK this weekend, when asked about forced mass sterilisations, say that he couldn't rule out single cases. The Foreign Secretary has already said that he'll be looking to work with partners on further establishing that evidence base of human rights abuses against the Uyghur people in particular. Can he go further and explain exactly what conversations he has had so that we can further inform our decision making and further actions?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and I agree with her, and I think the whole House, every individual, will share the disgust and the horror, the idea anywhere, any number of cases of forced sterilisation. And the testimony that we saw on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, I think, was truly harrowing, something I certainly hadn't seen before of that nature. She asked, I think quite rightly, about how we're trying evidence-based. I think we need to bear in mind two factors. One, the evidential points that I've already mentioned. Secondly, the balance of international opinion in the world. And of course we can work with our traditional partners, and that's really important, but we also have a groundswell of wider support amongst like-minded partners and countries, particularly those that share our value in the region or more broadly, who feel vulnerable to pressure from China, and that is a challenge. And the way the debate is viewed in some of those countries and by some of those governments is different to the way it's seen here. So we need to be smart about the way we approach this, so we gain consensus and we build up a ground of measures we've taken. And I believe that in the approach we've taken to Hong Kong, grounded joint declaration, the very specific obligations that have been violated, we're in the best position to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I very much welcome this much more robust attitude that we're seeing
from the front bench, because whilst he speaks about China's economic rise, it's coincided with a demise in collective sense of duty and responsibility, I believe, of the West. For decades, we've turned a blind eye to China's democratic deficit, its human rights violations, hope that it would mature into a global responsible citizen. That clearly hasn't happened. So can I ask the Secretary of State, is this now the turning point where we drop the pretense that China shares our values, given its actions, given its veto that it constantly uses at the United Nations, and of course ignoring WTO advice and ensnaring so many poor countries into debt? I very much welcome this today, but it is tactical. Can we have a strategic overhaul of our foreign policy in relation to China?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend. Of course, I think under previous administrations he was Foreign Office Minister during that period, but I recognise that he's always been very assiduous and loyal during that process. Look, he makes a reasonable point about...
That's why I'm on the backbenches now.
I couldn't possibly comment on that. But he makes a reasonable strategic point, and of course the integrated review is exactly an opportune moment to address that.
I'm going to run this with another 5 minutes, and members are going to make others miss out. We go to York with Rachel Maskell. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The catalogue of human rights abuses by the Chinese authorities is nothing new, and the extended security law in Hong Kong is just the next step. So while the suspension of extradition and export controls is necessary, why has it taken so long to reach this point? And how will the UK government act swifter in formulating its national counterparts to make sure all those who are experiencing human rights abuses in Hong Kong and across mainland are protected?
Secretary. I thank the Honourable Lady, but the national security legislation was only introduced on the 30th of June. We're towards the mid to end of July, and we've moved to not only extend BNO passport, a path of citizenship to BNO passport holders and those with eligibility, but we've also now taken these further steps on extradition and the arms embargo. All of these things need to be thought through carefully. They require legal preparation. I believe we've moved swiftly, reasonably and proportionately.
Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome today's announcement. Thank my right honourable friend for his statement. Does he agree with me that China must adhere to international law if it wishes to be treated as a leading member of the international community?
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right, and that's the relationship and the way we want to calibrate the relationship, looking for positives, mitigating against risk and guided by the international obligations, multilateral but also direct bilateral, which in this case in relation to Hong Kong, China freely assumed and now is in clear and serious violation of.
No? The State will be aware of the important financial contribution that Chinese students make to our universities and research sector in particular. Can you tell us what plans the government has should those numbers fall? And perhaps more importantly, what can it do to reassure Chinese students and those of Chinese origin in this country that they're safe and welcome here and to tackle xenophobic racism?
Can I say that I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising this point, and my statement made it clear that we value the contribution of travelling Chinese that they make, both touristically but also in terms of universities. And I think it is also timely to make that point to the British Chinese community, our most hard-working, productive, socially engaged members of our communities, how welcome they are, and that we will have no truck in this House, and certainly not on this side and in this government, with this descending into jingoism or any racism against them. They are an incredibly important member of our community and our society.
Heading to Stephen Metcalfe again. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his very robust statement. And does he agree with me that not only is the national security law to the detriment of the people of Hong Kong, but it's also doing to China itself, and that needs to be pointed out to them?
Can I thank my honourable friend? He's absolutely right, and I think in relation to Hong Kong, it is proving how counterproductive this step is, not just residents there, but for the broader people of China, given the economic, financial, but also reputational issues at stake.
Thank you. I welcome the government's new measure to Hong Kong, but I want to press him on the gross human rights abuses in Xinjiang. We said never again would the world stand by while a state set out to eliminate an entire culture, yet it is happening again. So as well as accelerating the Magnitsky sanctions on Chinese officials, will he accept that giving out investment opportunities to new nuclear, to the state-owned CGN, is giving out the wrong signal? And if he wants to be able to demonstrate real seriousness about gross human rights abuses, he could start by reviewing that policy.
I thank the Honourable Lady. I do share her horror and shock and the appalling human rights abuse in Xinjiang and more broadly. Of course, we assess very carefully not just any individual investment decisions, but also the integrity and resilience of the processes, and we keep that up.
So, John Rabel.
We make a study of essential dependence on China would leave us very vulnerable, and then have a strategy for developing those at home or with our allies.
He's absolutely right, and in particular in relation to 5G, but there are the other areas. That's exactly what.
In the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill, the government rejected an amendment that was designed to stop human tissue involuntarily harvested in China from entering the UK market. I've since met with the Minister for Asia and I'm pleased by. But will the Foreign Secretary, in light of what he said today, make a commitment that if those amendments are reintroduced in the other place, the government will look at them seriously anew?
Yes, we'll certainly look at them very carefully.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In suspending our extradition treaty with Hong Kong, has the Foreign Secretary decided that one country, two systems in Hong Kong is dead? In which case it would be for UK and Commonwealth judges to play such an important role in the Court of Final Appeal. Decided to wait to see how China implements the security law while working to preserve other aspects of the joint declaration, and particularly Hong Kong's independent rule of law, where our judges have played such an important role in the CFA.
Can I thank my honourable friend? He raises an excellent point. We will watch very carefully to see the whether and the extent to which the new national security legislation impinges on the judicial autonomy that under the Basic Law and Joint Declaration should be afforded to Hong Kong, and we will consult widely across government but also with the judiciary about what further steps we take in light of that.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.
To make sure that you can implement the right intervention. So, in terms of operation, we now 7 health zones affected, although 6 are only active right now. It's decentralizing operation to all those health zones, making sure that we have all capacity in terms of investigation, in terms of isolation, treatment, vaccination. And so we have a good team on the ground by Congolese, WHO staff we already had in Congo, some from North Kivu, others from Kinshasa, and a number of partners like MSF, UNICEF, IFRC working around various pillars. So we still have some challenges in terms of alert, mainly alert related to dead body, because it's very important to make sure our surveillance pick up all the alert, not only from the health facilities and alive alert in the community, but also dead body. And so we are scaling up, still have important gaps in terms of operation because of the difficulties to move around the area. So we continue monitoring the situation and having a daily briefing from the ground and making us scale up in the area of responsibility. So it's challenging in the context of COVID because in the capital city in Kinshasa, many people are focusing on COVID-19. So making sure that they don't play Ebola is extremely important. We need also from the national side to scale up operation. Thank you.
And if I just add some of the numbers, Ellen, we had 3 new cases the weekend. We now have 60 Ebola virus cases, with 56 of those confirmed, 4 probable, including 24 deaths. I think, and as Sose alluded to, the worrying aspects of this response in that there have been cases in 21 health area zones. So while the numbers are very low, the disease is quite dispersed. And 5 of 7 of those health zones have had cases in the last 4 days, which means the disease is active, it's not old. It is active disease in 5 health zones across a wide geographic area. Worrying is that there are still 9 cases and there are real challenges in terms of community engagement and convincing people to come for care in Ebola treatment centres. And of the overall period in terms of exposures, and again this may go back to the whole issue case finding and contact tracing and getting the information you need to know where factors are. It is interesting to me that in this case, in the most extreme situation of logistics, probably in the world, the data that comes in daily from the surveillance teams, tells us that for the people who've been exposed over the last 21 days, for example, the exposures, but over 1 in 3 people have been exposed to the event. Just over 10% have been, 11% have been exposed through nosocomial or in the healthcare system, and a lot further number of people have been exposed in a family context. So case investigation and contact tracing tells you who's at risk. And we're able to say for Congo, the big risk factor in this particular clusters of cases is funeral practice, and we're working very closely with communities then to really work with them on the funeral process and on engaging them on how to make that practice safer. It is very hard to engage in generalities. When you work with communities, you must be able to engage on specifics. Getting good data from case and cluster and the specific data that allows you to identify the risk factors and then engage positively with communities on how to reduce those risk factors. This is epidemiology and public health in action. If we can do this in a remote part of Congo, if we could do this in the middle of a war zone at Kivu, we can do this for COVID-19. It is not impossible. Many countries have demonstrated that all over the world. So I think even though we don't have perfect data from the field, and Jose can speak to some of the challenges we face logistically and operationally, the fact that we have these data, we know where our problems are in the field. We know where our hotspots are. We know what's driving transmission in those communities, and allows us and gives us the basis to intervene and to make a difference. So while the situation in Congo remains of concern, what reassures me at the moment is that we're improving in community engagement. There are many partners on the ground. And again, we'd like to thank our partners, particularly in the Red Cross movement, and others again are working with local teams in terms of safe and dignified burial, are working on communications, our colleagues in the UN system working on coordination, the World Food Programme working on logistics and support to base camps, but most of all, the frontline health workers of Congo, the Congolese doctors, nurses, hygienists, community engagement specialists who make up the vast majority of the front line in this response. And again, our thanks to the government, the Ministry of Health and the Institut National de Recherche Biologique, INRB, for their leadership in this response.
And thank you, Helen, for your question. Much of what we have been trying to get across today. And now I'll hand it over to Dr. Tedros for final words.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all who have joined today. And look forward to seeing you. I think the next will be on Thursday. Thank you.
Víme, na co peníze použít a chceme utratit na to, co potřebujeme, ale zároveň říkáte, musí být jasná pravidla toho, aby v těch jižních zemích to šlo na reformy, tak ale ta jasná pravidla se pak budou týkat i nás. Nebude to tak, že my si určíme, na co použijeme, nebo myslíte, že to je možné nějak dělat? Děkuji.
Ne, tak já s tím nemám problém, s těmi pravidlami a s tím governance. My jsme taky chtěli, aby Evropská rada měla větší kompetenci, jo, protože Evropská rada by mohla na to dohlížet. Problém je v tom, že z toho je ten pocit, že by nizozemský premiér sám chtěl vlastně na to dohlížet. Takže tam jsou nějaké návrhy, že nějak x zemí, když bude mít nějaký problém s nějakým grantem, tak můžou vyvolat nějaké jednání na úrovni Evropské rady. A ta první otázka, no ono samozřejmě, já principiálně souhlasím s tím a nechápu, proč vlastně ty jižní země, nebo kdo chce úvěry, ano, oni nám ani neřekli ty podmínky. Kdyby Evropská komise si půjčila na 23 let za minus 0,2, 0,3, tak je to lepší, než si půjčujeme my. A potom samozřejmě to můžeme využít, ale nebudeme vlastně ručit za ty jiné země. Takže ty jižní země si můžou půjčovat, takže to není tak, že by neměli peníze. No a co se týká vlastně ty pozice nizozemského premiéra, ano, on samozřejmě má nějaké názory a já s ním nesouhlasím v tom, když on říká, no my vám dáváme peníze, ale přece do které samozřejmě je určitou formou, ty BVčka, jsou tam nějak daňové zvýhodněné. Z České republiky každý rok odchází asi 4 miliardy euro, jo? Takže téměř 100 miliard korun a stejné je to v celé Evropě, takže v tomhle směru on by měl být solidární a měl by vnímat, že zkrátka jeho firmy, jeho nizozemské firmy vydělávají v těchto státech, které jsou čistí příjemci a to samozřejmě tam se absolutně lišíme v tom názoru. Já říkám, ano, vy nám dáváte nějaké peníze, ale naši lidi pracují od rána do večera. Ještě to bohatství, které naši vytvoří, odchází ve formě těch dividend, a ten parametr HDP, HND se nemění, takže i to je zkreslené, takže tady jsme úplně jiné názory na migraci a tak dále, ale tady tam by nějaká kontrola, ale říkáme všichni ano, ale nech je tam mechanismus, že je to vícero států, ne, že on sám de facto bude rozhodovat o všem.
Děkuji. Další dotaz Petr Kupec, ČTK. Pane premiére, bude Česká republika vaším jménem bojovat za snížení rabatů?
Ty rabaty my ani neznáme, kolik jsou. My jsme vždycky byli proti rabatům, rabaty vznikly vstupem Velké Británie, já si pamatuju před vírem ty částce, nám to vadí a byly 14,5 miliardy euro. No a teďka naposledy to bylo 45 miliard euro a vlastně ty šetřivé státy, ty frugálové vlastně se snaží navyšovat ty rabaty, nějak snížili ty svoje platby. Takže my principiálně říkáme, že to špatně, že to je nespravedlivé, že by to nemělo být, že je to výjimka, která nemá logiku, proč bohaté země dostávají tuhle slevu a my máme. Takže principiálně jsme proti, ale na stole už vůbec ne debata o tom, jestli ano nebo ne, ale jenom kolik a pokud jsme se pouštěli do ty debaty, že nechceme vůbec ty rabaty, tak já...
Děkuji. Další dotaz, Respekt, Kateřina Šafaříková. Žádala Česká republika pouze těch 2,34 miliard euro navíc. Proč právě tuto částku? Nebo jsme chtěli víc a nedostali jsme? A druhá otázka, na poměr grantů a půjček ve fondu obnovy. Pokud ano, jaký? Pokud ne, proč?
Ne, tak my jsme nežádali částku, my jsme hlavně mluvili o tom, že to kritérium nezaměstnanosti 100% je nepřijatelné a díky nám vlastně se to změnilo na 70-30 a z toho vznikla ta částka 2,4 miliardy euro. A co se týká toho poměru, tak já znovu opakuju, že je to hlavně pro ty země a v podstatě já s tím nemám problém. Samozřejmě, pokud bude méně grantů, i Česká republika dostane méně peněz, ale znovu opakuju, nechápu, proč nás nechali 1,4 nějaké částky, která teďka se ukazuje jako, že je úplně jiná. No. Takže to mi samozřejmě vadí a mělo se to domluvit asi dřív, aby jsme tady nestráceli čas, takže my se v tom nějak neangažujeme. Nám jde samozřejmě o to, že pokud se snižuje ta částka, aby se snižovala v tom fondu obnovy, to je ten Recovery Fund, a ne v React EU, protože ten React EU je de facto koheze a my chceme tu kohezi, a co se týká, tak tam jsou vlastně postupy, kde ten členský stát musí udělat ten vlastně projekt reformy, a potom jsou tam mechanismy na komisi a tak dále, takže já spíš taky říkám, že prosím nás, nemluvíme o reformě, ale mluvíme o restrukturalizaci našich ekonomik. My jsme vždycky mluvili, jak jsme závislí od automobilů, musíme něco udělat, no a teďka se to stalo, je to problém, slyším, že ta vertikála má problémy, asi na podzim, tam skutečně pokud se něco zásadní bude problém zaměstnanosti v tomhle sektoru. Jo, mluvíme o tom, já chci udělat vlastně pro nás ty klíčové obory jsou zdravotnictví, že máme ten investiční plán, máme jasný představu na přístroji a stavebnictví samozřejmě. Potřebujeme se z té krize proinvestovat a vnímáme tu mantru Bruselu, kde dělá digitalizace, jasné digitalizace chceme, cyber chceme, všechno, a otázka toho poměru těch peněz, a já znovu říkám, že přece ta členská země to ví nejlépe a samozřejmě i pro tu Evropskou komisi je lépe zkontrolovat konkrétní investice, když postavíme nemocnici nebo školy nebo školky nebo dálnici nebo obchvat, než například v tomhle období s oblibou říkám, že je tam nějaký projekt za 1 milionu korun, projekt stárnutí. No tak to říkám, to bych někomu mohl poradit i zdarma. 1 milionu korun jsme mohli dát možná na 2 školy kolem.
Děkuji, to bude patrně z tohoto komentáře vše.
Děkuji, nashledanou.
人喺天恒邨發生咩事？就係因為有一名天水圍手足啦，咁佢喺 Facebook 嘅公海度啦，有呢個留言嘅貼文啦，咁就係近呢2日都有，咁所以我哋而家就希望揾到人啦，因為佢啱啱喺 Facebook 講到話有機會自殺，唔知道大家喺公海同埋其他有冇見到？咁佢嘅 Facebook 嗰度咧就寫佢有機會係住喺天水圍咁樣，咁所以我哋就喺唔同嘅區希望可以揾到佢。咁而家除咗我哋之外，我諗其他channel 咁都開始揾緊人，希望大家如果係元朗天水圍街坊嘅話咧，都不妨即係希望大家可以一齊揾到手足啦。出門嘅同時都要小心有冇便衣嘅或者有冇狗筋啦，係啦，就唔建議大家。咁始終香港已經唔係一個好安全嘅地方。咁我而家喺天恒邨嘅附近度啦，咁如果大家聽到有咩奇怪嘅聲音啊，或者有啲咩異常嘅情況，都講翻，咁方便到我哋一齊去揾到呢個手足出嚟。咁大家可以希望大家住天水圍嘅手足們都可以街坊們都可以一齊去揾一揾呢個手足出嚟啦。咁佢近呢2日咧都有唔同關於今次運動嘅唔同嘅資訊啦。咁但係近呢2日咧，咁睇佢嘅 page 咧就話佢患癌嘅，咁有症狀患癌咁樣，咁可能所以佢就。近排佢對上喺今次嘅 post 之前對上一個係影咗一條繩，咁所以會擔心佢會唔會有呢個吊頸自殺傾向啦。而今日嘅話，佢講到係會離開咁樣，咁所以希望大家希望揾到呢名手足出嚟，因為而家發生嘅事唔單止係佢一個人，而家係全部香港人承擔到，所以希望大家可以幫到。嗰個手足咧，睇佢個 Facebook 相咧，咁大概一名嘅後生仔嚟嘅，咁大概20零歲、20零至30歲左右啦。因為佢冇乜近照喎，咁但係睇落去似都有可能有170幾，都佢對上一張相都係偏瘦嘅身材。咁希望大家可以留意下，如果有啲咩情緒有啲咩想抒發下講都好，其實不妨可以同唔同嘅人信得過人嘅傾訴下咯。咁我而家係喺天水嗰度，我知道喺其他村都仲有其他嘅人開緊拉沙，或者都一隻手足喺度唔同揾緊人，希望大家都小心啦，唔建議大家一個人出嚟揾嘅，揾個朋友啦，保護自己，保護隔離嘅人啦。 我而家係睇緊樓，但係咧喺樓頂度，我應該去咗是但一個樓頂度睇，但係其實我應該上唔到樓嘅天台。係男仔嚟嘅，嗰名手足咧，佢嘅 Facebook 名係叫阿 Ken， 跟住佢男仔嚟嘅，8歲左右啦，中等身材，應該7幾左右高度，係就係正常身材咁樣咯。但係街坊就唔好一個人聞啦，始終香港都唔係太安全，咁小心便衣。咁如果淨係翻屋企都要係啦，建議食個糖水先要翻屋企。咁我而家睇有冇啲高嘅地方我可以上到去啦，但係樓嘅天台我應該上唔到去。我睇下我會唔會上其中一層，其中一棟嗰啲最高嗰啲去睇下。咁我 OK 嘅，咁大家都望住個 live， 有咩事我會大聲叫嘅。係啦，咁如果大家見到街上有咩異常聲音或者情況，咁麻煩講聲。咁如果另外大家可能喺街度可能見到有人係啦，得閒如果見到人情緒好開心，希望大家去開解下佢啦。因為而家已經香港人係企喺同一陣線，而家香港面對緊嘅問題都係大家要同佢解決嘅嘢。我而家高嘅地方望，啲保安姐姐會唔會開門俾我先？OK， 我而家喺恒貴樓40樓，咁我都上唔到去啦，咁所以我而家睇下附近。咁係啦，咁就係話天水圍有個手足就想自殺，咁我可以望下對面啲樓，咁但係未知道佢可能喺邊條村咁樣咧，咁。佢呢兩日就喺 Facebook po 嗰度就出咗一啲喺個公開度講咗話有自殺傾向咁嘅 post 啊咁樣。我見對面有幾座嘅天台都冇人， 但係唔排除有死角或天水圍好多呢啲咁高嘅樓，咁希望大家附近情況係點樣啦？或者我可以去，咁而家我係喺天恒恒貴樓咁樣，咁講一講先，講完之後，我搭翻 lift 落去問下附近啲石橋或者有人有冇見到其他嘢。咁而家我係喺天恒村入邊啦，咁就喺最早前就喺 Facebook 喺公開度啦，就有手足留咗言，就話自己有想即係有自殺傾向咁樣，講咗貼咗啲留言咁樣，有咗叫阿 Ken。咁大概睇咗佢啲相啦，佢唔係好多近照，咁目測咧就應該係170幾左右高度啦，咁中等身材，年齡大概20到30歲。咁佢喺個貼文度寫啦，喺上尾2個貼文啊就鋪咗條繩，咁我就自己個人擔心佢可能會有吊頸咁樣嘅行為啦。佢應該真係好唔開心，因為佢講到佢話佢可能會亦都有症狀，咁所以當佢喺今次公開貼咗呢個文之後，就希望大家可以街翻去個天水圍附近，派埋朋友啦，唔好一個人，就希望可以揾到名手足出嚟。咁如果大家即係見到街上，如果係有人有唔開心，我希望大家都開解下咁樣。咁係啦，咁因為始終我哋人手有限咁樣，或者其實應該話而家佢哋面對嘅嘢，我哋都一齊要共同去面對。咁希望大家可以一齊出入，但係提醒大家唔好一個人去。咁我依家落翻去樓下，咁我希望可以問到啲石 Q 啊，或者現場街坊有冇啲咩唔同嘅，即係見到啲乜嘢，或者天台有冇俾人上咗去嘅嗰啲響啊嗰啲，翻去先，咁有機會再斷線，咁到時再同大家講。哎呀！40，即係我想如果你哋天台開咗嘅話，係咪會響㗎？
你喺邊度？你喺天台嗰度？
唔係，我想問下，因為你其實天台係會有鎖㗎嘛？係。開咗係咪會？
你係咪呢度住㗎？
我唔係呢度住，有個人想自殺，咁我哋好擔心佢會上咗天台咁樣，就想問一問，如果你
即唔係呢度係咪啊？
唔係，但係我想問一問，你哋天台開咗係咪會響？
即係唔係呢棟樓住㗎？
我唔係呢棟樓住，即係我唔清楚喺邊度住，但係我擔心可能會上咗嚟咁樣。我係天水連線嘅成員嚟嘅。我係天水連線嘅成員。咩啊？
你係咪嗰個咩部門㗎係咪？
我唔係政府部門嚟嘅，係啦，我係一個組織咁樣，我係揾緊人嘅。咁因為 Facebook 度講話佢會自殺，咁所以我哋擔心，就想問一問，其實好簡單，天台。依家係上去天台係咪？唔係，我唔係想。你依家咪上去40樓啊？我頭先上過40樓，但係我冇上去天台嘅。 我純粹想問下，你哋天台如果人哋開咗上咗去，係咪會有響？即係會有警鐘會響？你咩？你超過呢啲好啦，個姐姐都係仲未答到我。但係我冇上到去咩單位嘅喎。你上咩單位？你上49。我冇上單位啊，我就係上咗 lift 咋，係啊。係啊。咁呢個咩火車啊？天水連線。咩線啊？天水連線。係啊。咁如果大家街坊，如果係可能就幫手問下你哋每一條村嗰一棟樓啦，天台如果佢係開鎖咁樣啦，會唔會響？但係係咯，純粹想問下，咁個姐姐都係唔肯講。唔係，係啊，我純粹想知啫。唔係，我係天水連線，我純粹係上網見到有人想自殺。唔係，我而家唔係，其實我而家個問題好簡單，我純粹想問你上門會唔會響？會響嘅，咁哦，唔緊要，咁有咩我再過嚟啦。佢係住天水圍嘅，應該係住天水圍。咁咧，如果你留意到，佢應該20到30歲左右嘅，20到30歲左右。到30歲左右。係啦，咁一個男仔嚟嘅，應該都男仔。瘦嘅，應該都170幾啦，應該都瘦嘅，唔會太肥嘅，係啦，大概咁樣啦，未清楚。咁如果佢見到佢有人好唔開心，我到時會喺附近嘅，我再過嚟啦。哦，有冇樣？你有冇樣啊？俾我睇下。有，你哋等一陣。咁我。咁姐姐就話佢天台開就會響啦，咁呢個係個好啲嘅資訊。我而家想買如果停車場天台睇，但係其實個位置唔夠高咧，我睇唔到。準備去對面嗰棟再上樓再睇。咁啱啱都姐姐打咗俾保安部嘅，應該係問咁。係啦，咁如果我相信我都留咗資料俾佢嘅，咁佢應該會，如果有啲咩就會打翻嚟咁樣。係咁同大家留低啲講翻先。咁我而家人喺天恒咧，咁點解今日會出嚟係因為有個手足啦，咁佢就係鼻孔暴動啦，同埋佢有 cancer。Facebook 度出咗幾次貼文啦，都係話即係出咗幾個 post 啦，都係話有啲想自殺咁樣嘅，所以我哋就希望睇個 Facebook 啦，似係住喺天水圍區內嘅，咁咧就係一個男子叫 Candy， 咁就大概20零到30歲左右，咁咧睇佢唔係好得近照，咁睇佢啲相咧就應該都係瘦，唔會太肥嘅，咁高度應該都係正常男仔高度身材嗰估。咁而家另外啦，有司令佢嗰個 live 啱啱喺天悅附近，咁我而家都喺附近，我而家喺天悅。因為未清楚其實佢係住邊條村，咁佢啲相咧，咁有 街坊就覺得應該喺天后或天月咁樣，佢有張相影到對門嘅，係其實都唔 sure 咁，希望喺天河區內各位街坊就如果唔會一個人去啦，咁就如果有 friend 可以陪同嘅話，就希望大家可以一齊落去揾到佢。如果街坊另外聽到一啲即係異常嘅聲音啦，或者情況嘅話，記得可以報一報哨啦。可能你屋企位置睇到嘅嘢，我哋揾唔到咁樣，咁希望盡力啦。但係小心唔好暴露自己位置，同埋留意有冇便衣有跟緊你啦。咁小心最重要。我而家係喺天恒嗰個巴士站。我而家準備上去天台，一樣啦，我都係應該會轉一轉線。咦，開到晚上11點，我而家幾？佢鎖咗嘅喎，鎖咗應該入唔到去啦。佢其實跟住寫住就係11點會鎖嘅。咦？但係佢仲有得上。你知道上仲有冇鎖住啊？實係電機房嚟嘅，咁所以冇嘢。係，我同大家講翻，我已經有喺下邊等緊我啊，咁我而家落翻去，咁再講翻先。我而家喺天恒嗰個停車場喎，咁佢因為11點會閂，咁鎖咗樓梯上去咧係電，係啊，應該冇啦，落去啦，嚟。網民講咗話另外一邊唔知道有冇，咁我依家就想埋另外一邊去睇下有冇。係揾埋成員先啦，佢哋嚟咗揾我。我啱啱見到嗰個咩啊 HKND 啊。即係我需要講句啊！你咁樣講法嘅話，你似死咗都冇人發現你嘅，因為我自己個人認啊你嚇，嗰位食黑心。我去揾一揾我。 我哋而家喺進記停車場4樓，落去匯合翻下個文件先。
可以，因為其實我而家我自己一個。
咦？啲垃圾場呢邊喎？我而家喺進記停車場落翻去地下。
做佢卡埋。喂，點啊？
冇啊！頭先望埋天日嗰邊都冇乜動靜啊。天日都冇乜。係啊，應該係啱啱泊車嗰啲人嚟或者我估。可唔可以 check 下而家有邊個位置係未揾過？我哋去翻天恒嗰度上一棟啦。
天恒你兜咗一 round 咁啊？
我兜咗一 round 咯，但係我啱啱上咗行櫃，即係對面嗰天台就望翻對面就即係始終有4個位嘅，但係我就覺見多人咯。
行路太耐，應該去啲欣慈手，去啲偏僻啲啊。
都係嗰啲臭河嗰啲橋啊。
我哋有冇去過天業路？
如果冇，我哋去啦。天業路，去啊我哋。係咩？你試下換咗佢條線咧，咁咪有條線嘅問題。有第二條線咩？係啊，條線咧？啱啱冇線啦，佢 cut 出嚟。哦。我就翻去。就係㗎。呢度。應該係腳。係啊。再到咩？喂喂，俾翻手機你啊！
我㗎。
而家佢。
你？
撥咗勁多下冇人嚟啊！
我唔撚你啊！
我哋嘅。
立翻你拖鞋咯，我立咯。
我冇叉電啊！
我哋而家喺邊北
？sorry，我冇叉電。
大路啊！我哋去天業路。
我哋天業路。
去邊啊？
我哋而家分位去邊啊？你兜搭你
派咗幾個人俾你啊？
你哋沿馬路搭正。
20到30歲男仔，20到30歲嘅，跟住我諗應該同阿文呢啲咁嘅身材差唔多啦。冇㗎，係啊。
哇！
你哋知道
有一張嘅。
要阿 Ken，嗰17年㗎。叫阿 Ken。
我哋兜埋惠景軒嗰邊。
好啊，拜。
你睇 group 睇下有邊個位未兜啦。好，呢條啦。
再見。
其實而家係咪成街都係哨嘅？
係啊，我見到咧。喂，唔好爆，唔好爆，食飯啫，買宵夜啫。唔記得買。
有冇望遠鏡啊？
冇啊，冇人帶落。我有問㗎。
你有冇啊？
你有冇啊？因為我已經唔喺屋企。
你九座嗰度有冇啊？冇啊。
啱啱秋河有冇人揾㗎？
秋河唔會跳河啩？
我有見過有人好似揾，你睇緊住。
咁佢間停車場掃咗未？
掃咗，掃咗。
我要。
好。如果各位街坊去睇下嘅時候咧，如果去嘅話咧，都拍住片啊，小心啲咁樣，等大家知道你去咗邊度啊！即係你自己信得過嘅人都知道你去咗邊度。天晴冇人望，我哋去天業。我哋而家去天業。係啊。
引起暴動，網絡暴動已經有1130。
邊篇啊？你今日出咗篇？因為而家你哋咁夜一個人出街都危險，始終香港已經都唔係一個安全嘅地方。咁多被自殺嘅個案，即係各位街坊都要，即係各位街坊都要睇住自己啦，睇住自己身邊嘅人啦，咁樣。唔知着咩衫，因為佢嘅近照咧都係等先嘅，因為佢近照咧。翻嚟，好似冇咗。聽唔到你講嘢啊！我哋而家係喺天秀路公園嗰度行緊去天業路，即係健康中心啊，甚至可能會行濕地公園路嗰啲位置。應該唔會入酒店啦。你要去酒店，你仲要俾錢喎。依家其實都夜㗎啦，咁如果大家係冇出街，但係都麻煩留意下睇窗啦。如果你住得高啊矮啊都好，望一望窗或者望下對面樓頂啊，位置會唔會有人喺度好奇怪咁嘅行為咁樣咯。咁因為有陣時好多位我都上唔到去，我冇留意到，咁係靠大家街坊去睇下。咁記得報仇嗰陣時咧，揾到手機。係有個人自稱係佢阿哥，用咗佢 Facebook 就話揾手機，係佢個人手。即係佢 Facebook 出咗 post 留言。
用佢 account 出㗎嘛？
係啊，因為揾到，因為佢話佢阿哥。咁啱啱就係上網啦，喺佢阿 Kenny 佢出咗喺一個香港失蹤人口嘅關注組嗰度啦。咁佢就出咗 post 嘅，跟住佢就喺下邊留言就話：我係佢阿哥，揾到佢部手機，佢話再揾下佢，係啦。但係睇佢個冇講話，其實佢住邊度？係如果唔係縮窄唔到範圍，好難揾。
偷入咗去，唔會啩？有保安嘅，冇你亂諗。
即係唔係？即係咁多地方可以有咁高位嘅話，其實中富停車場冇。好啊！啱啱其實好多唔成員啦，甚至其他 live 嘅手足們啦，都有去咗睇唔同嘅停車場。 係啦，咁政府停車場冇，啱啱我哋喺翠微軒同埋天日都冇，天后係啦。而家喺維景軒後邊。你哋兩個上橋，我喺橋底嗰度睇啊。得邊頭啊？咁所以你跟阿文去。
佢阿哥去緊舊屋喎。舊屋？即係佢話佢阿哥去緊舊屋。
天水圍有冇講話喺啲舊屋？
旺犬屋中。
網上嚟講，佢話阿哥都仲未講到佢到底而家喺邊一個區。係，我都有睇到啊！知道佢喺邊個區嗰度。而家就睇下喺維景軒後邊嘅天橋啦，橋頂同埋橋入邊有冇人？係，我冇睇會唔會問到佢。係，因為真係未知佢住邊度，咁其實而家都係上網咁啊推測出嚟嘅，唔係好 firm 嘅。咁如果有人識佢或者朋友講得清楚佢喺邊個區，就會好揾好多。因為如果佢手機喺屋企嘅話，應該如果佢手機喺屋企嘅話，應該就唔會喺半區範圍內咯活動嘅話，佢唔會去呢啲地方。會唔會重遊舊地？呢個我哋好難講啦，因為咧我又睇咗佢 Facebook 啦，我亦都問咗，因為我想知佢咩樣，咁我揾咗相啦，咁大家都炒一炒咗佢，見佢講啲咩嘅，係啦，即係佢唔係好多陣，係啊，因為各位街坊唔好自爆自己一個位置咧，盡量小心少少好啲。同埋建議大家陣間就食個糖水先翻屋企啦。
我哋去唔去天悅望？
天悅有人㗎啦，應該，因為便衣舊，咁大家都睇住自己身邊嘅人啊。講翻重回舊地嗰度，因為佢 Facebook 咧，佢又轉載嘅嘢比較多，佢好少自己寫嘅。佢寫嘅嘢就係佢講話佢要自殺嗰個 host 咁樣。哦，銀座有便衣 SS 啊，同佢哋講啦。見到啊，橋頂冇人。銀座有便衣 SS。銀座。
天一嗰啲望過未？天一天晴。
天晴應該有人望過。有去天晴啊？
天一都未。
天一都商場、天台。天一冇停車場㗎嘛？
有，天一有停車場。
有停車場嘅咩？
冇咩？
天一喎，天一個商場喎。係咪講緊銀座？3個放咗3個放咗1個，係啊。
你入唔到去㗎呢間診所。
啊！天一有停車場㗎，我哋去天一啊，去完天一之後去天晴啊。
佢應該冇可能入到。
琴日放。
你哋好 IFF 太多，真係入唔到嘅。
你會唔會強入去啊？如果係你，
如果係我嘅話，我當年都係唔。我哋要思考點樣會可以去到邊度？
唔係，你要諗佢會唔會去到，會唔會去嘛？即係學校嘅話，
去
你覺得佢會唔會去啊？
佢講阿慧立不如提我哋個邏輯係咁嘅，佢係想自殺，佢係想死。如果要排入學校嘅話，佢要進行多一個排入學校呢個行動。
係啦。
邏輯上嚟講係多咗一樣嘢做。
佢就係啦。
係啊。
停！我哋過咗去天一之後，我哋就會去天晴。
可能知道住邊一棟。
未知。
即係有冇數喺後樓梯嗰啲？
未知，周圍都係估嘅啫。啱啱有人話有機會係筲箕灣，即係同埋佢阿哥頭先喺Facebook 度都冇講到話佢去邊一區嘅狗屋，亦都冇講話佢暫住喺邊一區，咁所以未係好。咁都大家都係盡人事，希望可以揾到佢。
咦？你俾翻部電話機？
俾翻咗。我哋 keep 住係啊，唔該晒大家 send 個 update 俾我哋。我哋而家去天日先，但係我天日去天一，搞唔掂啊！你哋全部都搞唔掂。
睇唔緊張路，你掛住睇手機嘅。
係啊，佢手機喺屋企啊，佢跟住話佢阿哥去咗佢屋企，就發現手機喺屋企，但係個人唔喺度，去緊舊屋度可能報案咁樣啦。但係佢由始至終喺所有樓講到話，阿 Ken 或者佢而家身處喺邊一區？天耀？咩嘢天耀啊？
冇，好似冇。
咩話？
佢問天水圍線有冇人 contact 過 Candy？
應該冇。
你 contact？ 冇啊，冇，唔係我係天水圍。
咁你咪去問咯，你喺個 group 度問咯。用 office， 即係用我哋個 official 嗰個喎。鎖咗 lift 啊，應該去到3樓啫，呢個 lift。但係天一個商場點睇佢去到3樓嘅啫喎？啊，佢有停車場喎，係咪停車場喺個底度？咁樣底唔會啦，咁我鏟入去天晴嗰度睇啦。個停車場係咁樣，同埋佢係第一層。佢但係唔知道佢住邊區。如果大家喺網上可以有更多嘅資訊，就問佢同我哋講聲，咁我就即刻派成員過去嗰邊睇咯。其實係嘅，即係如果佢可能都會揀一啲簡單啲，即係如果係就會去一啲方便啲嘅地方。睇車，你有冇睇天晴啊？天父都冇。咁我哋而家去睇天晴啊！
天恩都冇。我哋行咗天葉、天晴都冇。
你當時係用邊一個？你今日翻嚟
OK， 可以，我哋可以繼續。天晴村佢係其實一係咧，佢就會去一啲好偏僻嘅地方度，即係唔會喺一啲可能大街度啊，一係就會喺一啲高樓嗰度或者喺屋企嗰度自殺，係。唔希望佢，希望我哋可以揾到佢啦。咁即係例如可能我哋而家喺條街度行過，你就望唔到頂樓㗎。我上到頂樓，我都上唔到天台去睇嘅。咁就靠大家街坊，如果自己住頂樓嘅話，就望一望對面，或者你可以望到嘅 棟數啦，去望下佢頂會唔會有個男子咁樣好可疑咁樣，就同我哋講聲會好啲。天悅平台睇咗未啊？唔係啊，我問啊。佢住天恒，喂，佢係咪啱啱有網民講㗎嘛？佢住天恒喎，佢網上仲有冇好多啲 update 啊？即係佢係咪住天恒啊？即係咪 firm 佢住天恒嘅？唔係，我問緊。係啊，即係我啱啱都去，我喺恒貴嗰度上咗去啦。跟住我亦都留咗資料俾個姐姐，我就問佢即係天台開天台會唔會響？佢答咗我會嘅。哦，嗰張正面相阿哥留言話唔係 Candy， 即係網上佢 Facebook 17年嗰張。喂呀，唔好爆。天悅我哋有成員睇咗咁樣，有日街坊都有睇咗啦咁樣。我行下天晴啊。佢阿哥話佢喺元朗返工喎。住喺邊啊？佢住喺邊啊？黐線，好奇怪喎。佢喺元朗返工。唔係，咁我都覺得佢係應該係本區人嚟嘅，因為佢咧即係 Facebook 嗰啲所有嘢咧，佢都係即係 repost 啦，都係原天嘅嘢多嘅，係啊。你開佢個 Facebook 嗰個專頁俾我啊，即係佢嗰個香港失蹤咩人口關注組，佢哋有嗰個 page 啊。係啊，你入去啊，你行。就係佢哥哥講嘢講話分開啊！我同得 B 行啦。係，即係佢阿哥講嘢都好唔一致。分開行。佢好多資訊都唔完，佢去咗舊屋啦。但係問題係佢冇講話去邊度。係啦，就係佢阿哥講嘢好散啊，即係佢唔會一次過講啲嘢講晒，佢噴啲牙膏咁樣擠出嚟。咁但係冇，我哋而家淨係得呢個線索嘅時候，我哋唯有去信佢咯。佢呢一刻都仲未講到佢自己係，仲未講到自己喺邊一區嘅，係啦。咁就係話佢喺元朗返工，住嘅都係仲未講到，係啦。我哋我哋分小組咧，即係我唔係一個人嘅，所以安全嘅，同埋大家喺度陪住我啊嘛。咁係啦，都係嗰句，麻煩大家望下對面樓，或者你望到高處嘅地方去望一望到天台。我頂住我上到頂樓咯，但我上唔到天台。阿哥哥去咗係啊。同埋好多元朗天水圍㗎。佢 like 咗阿 K， 仲拍同埋 Facebook， 應該住天頌。我幫你睇下先。佢哋話咧，佢 Facebook like 咗仲拍，跟住即係仲拍阿 Deco 啊。佢 Facebook page like 咗 Deco 啦 ，like 咗陳思雅。
即係中嗰邊嚟㗎，可能。
like 咗阿 K。
即係中咯，有機會喺呢3個位度出現。
中富啊！
中同埋
中富
中拍同中華啊嘛。
係啦，咁但係話樓咧就應該對門睇落去係一次公屋嘅，咁應該都係中即係。知中啊！中華咯，天中華天華。咁
我哋一下揾人去華，一下揾。
你哋去天，你
中我哋去華。
呢度，但係呢度未睇完嘅喎，呢度唔睇。
兜咗一轉咯。
你真咩？咁大條村，你嗰度都未睇完啊？
我哋未睇2期啊！我哋未睇2期啊！
咁啊，我去睇2期啊！
你哋睇2期，
你哋去咗天眾先，我陣間去天華。OK， 行啦，我哋而家去埋個，我哋而家去埋個2期先。咁2期都係3棟，咁所以我哋去睇下。咁有機會咧，佢可能係元朗人嚟嘅，咁都需要有各位即係而家睇嘅 live 嘅，如果有朋友住喺元朗咧。都叫我會唔會有我希望真係好希望可以揾到呢名手足佢嘅。 天華有街坊，你幫我問下佢哋天華同天眾係咪揾清楚真係冇同佢講話佢 like 咗佢啲 page， 咁有機會喺眾話啊，我哋個 group 啊。街坊小心啦，係啊，去筲箕灣嘅街坊小心啦，唔好一個人去啊！你記得帶埋啲人，帶埋 friend 啊，或者你自己開住 live 啊，開住 live 你唔好斷啊，有啲咩都揾到你啊嘛。佢係講話天眾天華揾咗人嚟，唔係即係跟住話阿 Kenny 喺 Facebook 度 like 咗眾華嘅總之 Deco 同埋思雅個 page， 就話有機會住喺嗰度咁樣咯。你自己醒目啦，去筲箕灣嗰個景目啦。
周圍最高嘅建築物
Good question， 我唔知，我覺得啲樓
最高嘅建築物
應該係啲樓，
又得人入到去跳樓嘅，
應該係啲樓，一定要最高嘅。司令去緊元朗，元朗都好大嘅。如果街坊可以一齊快啲 share 出去即係揾手租樣嘢，可以大家一齊去。本身住天耀嘅
阿哥講嘅。
咁天耀揾人去睇啊，睇邊個成員去到啊？叫佢哋報一次位置啊！我哋而家喺天晴明丁丁嗰幾棟嗰度，我唔識瞓啊！即係我就會嗌佢俾人孤立咗天晴喺晴喜樓嗰度。即係都係嗰句啦，得天水圍咧
唔使純天晴啊嘛，有啲
係啊。不過我想望一望個車頂唔係個樓頂，即係其實天水圍同埋太多村啦，咁其實好需要大家去留意下咯。佢屋企人去緊元朗揾我哋都睇會唔會係咯？希望大家啲人力分散下，咁有啲咩急事我哋都可以第一時遇到。咁我哋天華啦，掛住冇掛住架車我出嚟。係啊，其實係啊，所以我就頭先有問過有幾多去其他村度叫佢哋去問下上天台會唔會？因為有啲可能有啲樓層咧，佢舊啲咧。即係我嗰時曳啦，我細個嗰時好曳啦咁樣，跟住發現係上去係冇人知㗎，有啲甚至會唔會係即係會擔心呢樣嘢咯？會唔會可能佢咁啱唔響壞咗，擔心呢啲？咁但係係最頂嗰層咧係會有 cam 喺度嘅，咁就所以就係有啲咁就講，所以佢哋可以大家留意。其實係啊，如果佢住得高嘅話，其實佢唔使去波達去揾一個高啲嘅位置，佢屋企就係一個地方咁樣。但係佢哥哥話佢唔係屋企嘅，咁所以個人而家仲未揾到，就希望喺其他區即係會喺其他區內會揾到佢咯。係啦，線索唔多。 咧都係即係如果大家係平時有啲咩想傾訴下，就揾一個信得過你嘅人去傾下，唔好即係咁樣噏住咁樣諗唔去，因為可能你講出嚟，大家都有共同經歷嘅時候，就可以幫到手咧。咁我哋而家去天秀路就係準備行翻去天華嗰邊睇下。我哋而家去緊天華，暫時 only 區得嗰個即係得嗰個阿哥，但係佢講嘢即係佢可以一齊講好多資訊，大家去揾，但係佢冇咁樣去做，佢淨係下佢咁去講。希望係佢係散下心啦咁樣，係啦，唔希望佢會諗唔開咁樣，所以如果大家揾到佢就開解下佢啦。
天華天影橋有一個人。
天影橋。臭河嗰啲位嚟嘅喎，睇有冇我哋邊個人最近，我哋邊度最近有人喺臭河嗰。有更多關於 Ken 嘅相，我陣間睇下先。我哋而家行翻過去天華嗰邊。係啊，我哋見到天華天橋度有個人啦，所以我哋而家睇附近有冇成員喺臭河嗰邊可以去望一望啦。係啊，有人去緊係咪？咁我哋有成員去緊嗰邊㗎啦。我哋啲成員去望緊㗎，可以揾到，希望佢真係揾到佢啦。唔識。天影橋咁樣咧，呢個筲箕灣嘅街坊，多謝你嘅，小心啊，翻屋企。估唔到筲箕灣嘅街坊都有留意到我哋呀！咁我而家係行到天富，我跟天華。
天富有人揾咗㗎咯喎。
唔係啊，我而家去天華我哋。好，但因為佢啱啱喺橋嗰度有，咁所以我哋附近範圍度咁樣，原來係過去睇下啦。天華嗰邊冇好平靜，但係佢一個人坐得去邊，係都係希望大家要留意下啲人會唔會可能好唔開心啊咁樣。我想去叉電啊！你有冇叉緊？
我冇叉到啊！
叉電咧？
睇你個袋，但係你條線叉唔到喎。
可能錯佢會痛。Let me try。幫我袋住啊！ 你冇電啊？我冇啦。黐線。線都冇。去關辦啦，去補給下。哦，真係差唔多啊條線。咦，唔係我差緊啦，差緊。我睇唔到 group 啦。係啊，你有咩講？七仔租電，七仔租電咧，又要單個，可以睇到啦。七仔叉電咧，咁樣跟住要俾錢咁樣。咁我去辦事處啊，去辦 office 都得好過。啱我順路，我就去得嘅啦。如果真係咯，街坊如果平時有心事，我哋係好願意同大家去傾偈。係啦，咁如果大家係想見下我哋親人同佢傾偈嘅話，我哋冇人歡迎嘅。係啦，24小時 on call， 咁可以嚟平時可以去天水可以揾到我哋天水，即係揾到阿啲人啊，或者揾到阿俊都。即係如果大家有啲唔開心，咪傾下咯。你有幾多 percent 啊？我哋去關辦啦。我 suppose 有帶鎖匙出嚟。咁我哋而家係喺天富，我哋過緊去天恩嗰度，我去補給下個叉電之後，我哋就會直接去天華。咁啱啱講到啦，天華天影橋嗰度就有個人去咗，咁唔係嚟嘅，係啦，咁 confirm 咗就唔係嗰名手足嚟嘅。咁暫時咧，而家人都未揾到，同埋未有好過多嘅資訊啦。咁所以我哋而家去補給，除咗係繼續喺區內度慢慢揾。各位街坊都好雀躍咁樣，我哋有好多連線成員都好靚女㗎，靚仔唔知啦，係啊，唔知大家點樣評價啦，但係就靚女嘅，係啦，輕鬆啲啦我哋而家，但係希望大家都係不忘要繼續喺度揾手足。夠啦，筲箕灣街坊知啦，知道啦，誠邀你過嚟啊！我哋臨進辦事處咧就嚟開幕啦，係啊！咁如果大家街坊係有啲咩想揾我哋幫手去揾臨進傾偈啊，就可以過嚟啦。咦？等等，咦？呢條鎖匙錯？唔係，我條鎖匙嘅。等等陣先，拖住我哋啊！哎呀，我鎖匙係散出嚟㗎，有，但我唔記得咗邊度。係啦，咁我哋而家去開我哋嘅叉電先，因為如果冇電嘅話，我哋就開唔到啦。OK。應該有啩，你開燈啦！ 咁我就裝啦。OK， 我放低手機先，但係我哋係揾緊尿袋。呢個尿袋咯，我要先啦，但係喂75%啦先。先啦，我要先攞尿袋。先呢度係男人 iPhone 先啦，佢哋都唔係。你熄咗個 live 佢先啦嚇。唔使，我放低咗，你唔好講錯。我講咗。Type C 嚟嘅全部都係，因為我哋淨係用 Type C 這種。係啊。好啦。我哋同大家講再。我哋同大家講再見。嗰個天喺橋嗰個唔係嚟嘅。你叉到啊！叉到啊！先啦，叉到。唔係啊，叉到啊。咁我哋可以繼續我哋嘅行程。係，我都係咁啊。好。係。揾多廁所先，喺度。差唔多。OK， 好，我哋可以繼續我哋嘅行程。記得留意下每棟咧，即係咩啊？差唔到咩？差唔到啦。好，我差到頭先。我見到啊，就係問下有冇人喺附近啦。咁佢哋落線啦。佢哋呢個 office， 當我哋嗰個辦事處嘅人都係用緊iPhone 嘅時候，關辦嘅人係用 Type C 同埋 Android 多嘅，所以我哋喺呢度唔係好成功咁樣揾唔到線。喂，係咪？你 hold 住佢啦，你仲有冇插到電啊 ？OK。幫我扯住。OK， 可以繼續行我哋。有一個去天華。咁我哋喺呢個 office 度，除咗補給咗電之外，都補給咗嘢飲。啱啱天恩嗰度咧就冇講到嘅，可唔可以再幫我睇下嗰個仲有冇抽緊啊？差唔多啊，即係睇下佢嗰個 Facebook 嗰度咧有冇更新到任何字？
佢都冇更新。但係啱啱有人，我啱啱見到就係有人話豐田路嗰度有救護車咯，擺咗喺度，然之後全副武裝咁樣出咗嚟。Candy 住天耀，啱啱天耀都應該有人行咗。咁我哋暫時都守喺呢個天北呢個位置。咁咧，其他成員都喺啱啱去咗臭河個位置啦。啱啱我哋成咗臭河位置啦，天南都有嘅。咁我哋而家留喺天北嗰度，就方面有啲咩事。咁另外咧，但係佢有機會可能係住元朗嘅。啱啱話豐田路嗰度有咩話？咩啊？白車啊？有白車。有白車咁全副武裝，咁但係咧佢哋白車依家係任何人報即係要救護車嘅話，其實都係會佢哋 full gear 嘅，即係就係會包晒防護衫咁樣啦。咁其實喺之前咧肺炎爆嘅時候咧，都係咁樣去全副武裝去接濟，因為費事有其他有漏網之魚。但係當然啦，都有句佢哋件衫始終都唔夠9個嗱，或者嗰啲咩防力3 Pro 嘅。我哋而家係喺天恩臭河。
話係啊，保用啊啱啱有成員去咗睇啦，係唔係嗰名手足嚟嘅？咁所以就另外去咗其他地方再去揾啦。咪咁有機會咧其實我哋應該每個地方都要去睇下嘅，咁我想巡下。今日機會可能琴日自殺，可能唔開心坐喺河邊度諗下嘢啊，坐喺一啲天台度諗下嘢啊，咁都有機會嘅。咁就係要靠大家去仔細去觀察下，睇下唔開心啦咁樣。近呢一年咧發生過咁多事，我哋終於有翻之前嗰種人情味，大家真係會即係大家會關注關心下大家咁。希望呢樣嘢我哋可以繼續對上街上，同埋就嚟放榜啦。咁放榜相信都可能好多考生會唔開心。咁如果面對住咁多壓力嘅話，即係一個人可能好難接受到。咁如果到時街坊啊又有見到，雖然當然啦，戴好口罩亦都好重要嘅。但係如果見到有人唔開心，咁你遞包紙巾去安慰下，咁都其實對一個好唔開心嘅人嚟講係一樣好有用嘅嘢嚟嘅。咁我而家都係天恩村內，我架單車唔喺度啊！但係我另外嗰個成員唔識踩單車，我識㗎，佢識向前踩，唔識轉彎，咁所以我哋用腳行啦。係啦，咁另外係咯，都唔記得咗講，聽日係721啦。咁阿俊，你要袋住啊！阿俊佢哋都放咗出嚟啦。咁佢哋因為本身較關注721呢個航站嘅人，咁就俾狗拉咗啦。咁其實都要好好咁關注下，點解佢哋選擇性去執法？點解明明4個人去遊行，咁樣都可以？其實佢哋今次咧係一開始佢哋分咗2批啦。如果大家有睇到，阿俊咧同埋阿 Leon 咧係喺另一邊係走咗，但係走咗之後中途截住佢哋，就話佢哋係組織非法集結咁樣。佢一邊講就話會放人，另外一邊就拉咗嚟。咁另外我哋覺得佢翻咗屋企，未清楚啊，要都係佢哥哥，因為佢哥哥始終係佢知道佢住邊嘅人。呢啲佢已經帶佢哥哥已經再喺 Facebook 度冇再任何嘅係咯，靠睇會唔會再可以 share 到出去，等佢嘅朋友可以見到有更加多嘅資訊可以。我哋而家喺天晴嘅的士站、巴士站嗰個位置，咁係咯。咁所以同埋我哋有2位成員喺尋日就舉牌啦，寫警黑歐，而係確確實實就係因為721呢樣嘢，大家先至發現原來呢啲嘢一直都係實，而一直都要，只不過我哋冇講或者佢冇咁明顯知道。今次嗰次嘅721係真係危害到我哋香港人無警時分，狗屋竟然可以山閘嘅時候，咁我哋香港人嘅自由喺嗰刻，從此就係喺自己手上，而唔係單靠佢哋咁樣去做。同埋佢哋而家變咗係一個之後，甚至係港共政權，林鄭都係企嚟嘅屌港共政權嘅旗幟之後，咁安法之後，我哋嘅自由冇進一步打碎，呢個係真係嘅事實。見到救護車喎，但係冇響。係啊，睇佢轉去邊。